welcome to a new episode of the Mid Post. And I don't know if you've been paying attention, but we've witnessed some potential playoff matchups recently. Within the last couple of weeks, we've seen the Pistons face off against the Cavaliers and the Thunder match up against the Denver Nuggets, both serving as matchups that could possibly be East and West semifinals matchups, respectively. Additionally, we saw the Knicks recently play the Cavaliers, which is, depending on who you are, a potential Eastern Conference Finals series. Although I personally lean towards the Pistons versus Knicks physical matchup from February 19th for that. And speaking of the Pistons, they recently played against the two Western Conference Titans in the Thunder and the Spurs, essentially previewing what could be NBA Finals matchups. Now, there were some key injuries in some of these games, so they weren't authentic trailers of what might happen come April, May, and June, but they had me feeling a little Destradamus. So I want to look towards the future today. Today, I'll be giving you my courtside perspective of what we could see from various playoff contenders this spring. I actually want to separate this by conference though. So this week's episode, I'll cover the Western Conference playoff look ahead. And when you come back next week, we'll be going over the Eastern Conference. So we got some a duo of episodes that are going to be filled with future predictions and exciting things to look forward for the future and watch for as we get closer to the playoffs. So without further ado, we're going to start out with the West. And like I said, I want to talk about the Titans. I want to talk about the big three: the Oklahoma City Thunder, the Denver Nuggets, and the San Antonio Spurs. Now, I think a lot of us view these three teams as the big three, which I know the standings currently don't reflect that because Denver has slid a little bit. They are now fifth in the West, but for most of the year, that top three has been Oklahoma City, San Antonio, and Denver. So I'll stick with that. And there is going to be a lot of crossover here, but I actually want to focus on the defensive side of the floor first and help you take notice of how the Denver Nuggets and the San Antonio Spurs attempt to defend a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder in different ways. So starting out with the San Antonio Spurs, this is what makes their defense effective and why they pose a legit threat to the Oklahoma City Thunder. The bottom line is that the San Antonio Spurs have the luxury to play better and bigger individual defenders than the Denver Nuggets do. They have Stephon Castle as their point of attack defender. We know this. And then they have Wemby on the interior. These guys are the stars of the San Antonio Spurs defense. Just recently, we seen Stephon Castle absolutely clamp up Cade Cunningham. He shot like 19% from the floor or something like that. And he was just always doing his work early, fighting over screens, fighting over off-ball screens, pushing Cade out of his spot so he couldn't receive clean handoffs. I mean, it was a lot more than just what he was doing in terms of affecting his shots. He was getting in his grill, making it hard for him to make passes and get into the lane, making it hard for him to receive the ball. And those are all the things that you admire about the San Antonio Spurs defense, especially when Stephon Castle is out there doing what he does. Of course, Wemby, that speaks for itself. Just saying his name, you think of what he does on the defensive end. He's an elite interior presence. We know this. It's his intimidating size, his ability to, you hear the commentators say it all the time. You think he's not paying attention, and then all of a sudden your shot is blocked. That is the impact that Victor Wembanyama has on the interior. But it's not just these two gentlemen that make the San Antonio Spurs defense lethal. They have De'Aaron Fox, who's always been good at getting in the passing lanes, and is somebody who has, because of the guard play they have and the guard depth that they have, I really think he's taken upon himself to get better on ball in terms of his defense. Not just be somebody that can get into the passing lanes, but you do see him at times make that extra effort to stonewall defenders and be somebody that slides his feet and sits in that chair. And you love to see that from him. You love to see that from Dylan Harper, Harrison Barnes, Keldon Johnson. Going into the interior presence, Luke Kornet. You've heard me say that a lot on this show, that Luke Kornet allows them to have an interior presence no matter what lineup they put on the floor, having him as a backup to Wemby. So I love what the Spurs have, and I think it's really a matter of how these guys are individually proficient in screen navigation / communication, stifling ball movement with stone walls, and like I said, rim protection that they get from those guys respectively, and even some of the other guys on the roster. And when you look at the skill sets that these individuals provide, it ensures that the San Antonio Spurs have backline and frontline communication for 48 minutes. And that is why they have tight and timely team rotations. So that alone is a big reason why they have one of the best defenses in the NBA. But I think when you think about their personnel, it also allows them to mirror the Pacers method. And that's where I think the San Antonio Spurs have a really big advantage over a lot of teams in the league, especially out west, a team like the Denver Nuggets or sometimes even the Houston Rockets. I think the Houston Rockets do have that defensive versatility, though. They do lack a little bit of it inside, but they do have it on the wings. But focusing on the San Antonio Spurs, I really think they're going to be able to mirror the Pacers method that we saw in the 2025 NBA Finals. The reason why the Pacers were able to take the Oklahoma City Thunder to 7 games is because they had a dedicated defender on Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And the San Antonio Spurs have already shown that in their regular season meetings, that they are fully ready to make that guy be Stephon Castle. And I think Stephon Castle wholeheartedly takes pride in that matchup to play that role. And the reason why this works is because they play physical, they fight over screens, and they extend the pressure 94 feet. Those are all the boxes you have to check when you're guarding Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. You have to tire him out because he's the guy that is going to handle the ball a lot of the time. You have to fight over those screens because he's always looking to get into the lane or get to his mid-range shot. You can't give him room to breathe, which even that in itself is hard to do because he's no stranger to drawing fouls off contact. And then you have to extend the pressure 94 feet. That's what the Indiana Pacers did with Andrew Nembhard, and it worked wonders. They tired him out, just having to trip after trip, worry. He could barely get past Andrew Nembhard to get into the action that Oklahoma City wanted to run. So when you play that kind of defense, you force Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to eventually have to give up the ball or risk developing a stagnant offense, getting a late shot clock shot, all of those things. And what that does is force the other Oklahoma City Thunder players to carry greater offensive responsibility than they generally have during the regular season. And the Pacers found success because, yes, Andrew Nembhard played respectable defense on Shai, but they had Aaron Nesmith, who was on J-Dub, and they had physically stronger bodies in Miles Turner, and even you could say Pascal Siakam, who traded moments with Chet Holmgren, and they were able to outmuscle him and out-rebound him and push him off his spot and make him quiet on offense. And when that happens, that leaves Lou Dort or Isaiah Hartenstein to gain more responsibility than they usually get. And these are two guys who prefer to be set up rather than create for themselves. We know that Lou Dort, a lot of his isolations, when he does get into that bag, they're usually an emergency button in a late shot clock scenario. And then you have a guy like Isaiah Hartenstein who loves getting those floaters out of short roll situations and pick and roll situations. So the Spurs have the personnel to follow a similar defensive formula as the Indiana Pacers, and that was proven successful with the Pacers pushing the Thunder to 7 games last season. So I fully expect, or at least hope, that the San Antonio Spurs are going to follow that same method and make it hard on Oklahoma City. Now, on the flip side, you have the Denver Nuggets, and this is what makes their defense less effective versus a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder. I always disliked how they have to guard a team like OKC, but this is why. The Denver Nuggets have to rely more on their team defense as opposed to benefiting from the comfort that comes with having individual lockdown defenders like the San Antonio Spurs have. I think they did an excellent job getting Jonas Valanciunas this offseason, but that didn't fix their interior defense issues. Again, they don't have a Victor Wembanyama. They don't have a Luke Cornett. They don't have a Chet Holmgren type of interior defender, and that has always plagued the Denver Nuggets for the most part. And I also think this is going to demand that Peyton Watson guard the best scorer while serving as a tertiary scoring option in the half court. And we know that responsibility at this pace of the NBA in this era that's a lot to handle. Now, Peyton Watson is an excellent one-on-one defender, but we all know that Shai Gilgeous-Alexander is a different beast. And he really reminds me of Jaden McDaniels in that regard. He has the size to contest without jumping as high, which Shai wants defenders to do. He wants them to leave their feet so he can lean in and draw those fouls. But Peyton Watson, again, like Jaden McDaniels, has a lighter frame, and that's probably going to prevent him from absorbing the contact from Shai that comes with those push-offs and those step backs he likes to get to. And I don't see this as a guaranteed weakness. I don't mean this to be doom and gloom. I've actually seen Peyton Watson succeed with stonewalls and things of that nature, even against stronger guys. I've seen him do it with, albeit a shorter guy, but a strong guy in Norman Powell. So maybe he'll be able to do it. But it is something to pay attention to, that matchup right there. Now, as a team, though, they have done a pretty respectable job versus the Oklahoma City Thunder. They really are good at putting two on the ball and forcing Shai to give it up early. I think we saw that in the most recent game they had in Oklahoma City. They put two on the ball. They forced Shai to give it up early. But the thing about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, he's just so good offensively that he still finds ways to split those traps or get the outside angle and drive to the basket, or even drive and find somebody in the corner. And speaking of finding his teammates, that's the other part about the Denver defense, that they kind of have this high risk, high reward relationship with their defense, is that they load the box to shrink the floor versus Shai's drives. However, that method invites Shai Gilgeous-Alexander to attack those gaps and find shooters. So they're so good at preparing for those Shai Gilgeous-Alexander drives that they're totally ignoring corner shooters. And when Oklahoma City is hot from three, that doesn't become the best strategy. And the funny thing about it is that Oklahoma City is considered as a mediocre shooting team, but they do have respectable shooters. I said this last year in the playoffs. I think Oklahoma City shoots a lot better than what we give them credit for. Sure, they have their moments where they're cold, but individually, when you look at the shooters that they have, they're actually pretty good. And after a while, this formula where they load the box only instills confidence in guys like Cason Wallace, Alex Caruso, Lou Dort, Isaiah Joe, and now Jared McCain to walk into easy threes, because they know Shai's going to draw the double. I'm going to be wide open. If I take my time, snap my wrist, it's cash. It's not like a lot of these threes are being contested. So like I said, when they get hot, it just opens up the game for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander even more. And I think we've seen that happen in the last two meetings specifically, where they faced the Denver Nuggets. That first meeting, but I think it was around the All-Star, right before the All-Star break. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander wasn't even scoring. He was just doing an incredible job finding his teammates, and they were knocking down shots. He was getting assists. He wasn't even scoring yet, and the Oklahoma City Thunder were able to develop a lead over the Denver Nuggets. And then you have the most recent game where it's the opposite. Shai, he went off. He was their only scorer in double figures by halftime or something like that. And then towards the end, his assists started opening up because he drew so much pressure. So I say all that to say it's just a scary sight when OKC is making threes and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander doesn't have to score as much to lead the team to wins. And because the Denver Nuggets aren't a great defensive group, they have to limit Shai and hope that the shooters miss. And it's a very pick your poison strategy. Like I said, OKC is a much better shooting team than most have been led to believe. And this specific strategy of hope requires that the Nuggets score every bit of their league-leading 120 points per game to stay ahead of the Thunder's potential avalanche. It's a classic case of your best defense is your offense. And the Nuggets certainly have the offense to do that, but they have to be on their P's and Q's if they want to avoid the Thunder's potential avalanche, if they're not going to play the defense to stop it. But then that's a perfect segue, because what beats great defenses? Offensive dexterity. And the Denver Nuggets thankfully have that. But I also want to focus on the San Antonio Spurs. Now, when you look at some of the notable losses from the regular season for the San Antonio Spurs, a lot of those losses came from teams with offensive depth. They are 1-1 versus the New York Knicks, who have Jalen Brunson, Karl Anthony Towns, Mikal Bridges, OG Anunoby. They're 0-1 versus the Charlotte Hornets, Brandon Miller, Con Knipple, Miles Bridges, LaMelo Ball, Kobe White is now into that equation. They are 1-2 versus both the Phoenix Suns and the Minnesota Timberwolves. You look at a team like the Phoenix Suns, who have Devin Booker, Dillon Brooks, Grayson Allen's averaging 17 a game. You have Colin Gillespie, who's had a really improved year this season. And now Jalen Green, if he can stay healthy, that's another guy you have to account for. You look at the Minnesota Timberwolves. They have Anthony Edwards, Julius Randle, Jaden McDaniels, Naz Reid. Bones Highland has had a really resurgence kind of year this season. And then even then, you still have to mention Ayo Dosunmu and Dante DiVincenzo as sneaky guys who can get hot at the right time. The Spurs are also 1-2 versus the Golden State Warriors, a team that thrives off constant ball movement. They're 0-2 versus the Cleveland Cavaliers, and they have an interesting mix because they still run a lot of traditional 1-4, 1-5 pick and rolls, but they also have some of those wing pick and rolls and even inverted pick and rolls that they use, especially now that they've acquired James Harden. So this mixes up their attack. It creates drive and kick situations, those dump offs to the bigs. They have knockdown shooting, so those situations work. And again, James Harden takes that to another level. So you look at a lot of those teams are playoff teams, or at least teams that are in the hunt to be in the playoffs this season. And it's no surprise that because of their offensive dexterity, they are able to overcome a team like the San Antonio Spurs. And it doesn't stop there. You look at even Oklahoma City this season. They are 1-1 versus the Miami Heat, the Toronto Raptors, and the Charlotte Hornets. So again, we just went over the Charlotte Hornets, but the Heat are absolutely loaded with offensive depth with Norman Powell, Bam Adebayo, Tyler Hero, Andrew Wiggins, Jaime Jaquez. You could even throw Pelle Larsson in there some games. You have the Raptors who have Brandon Ingram, Scotty Barnes, RJ Barrett, Emmanuel Quickley. They are also another team that is 1-2 versus the Minnesota Timberwolves. And they are 1-4, of course, versus the San Antonio Spurs, who have De'Aaron Fox, Victor Wembanyama, Devin Vassell, who's had a really good year this year, Stephon Castle, Dylan Harper, Keldon Johnson, even Julian Champagnie, who can go off from beyond the arc. So again, that offensive dexterity is what really matters if these teams, as they are probably going to cross paths at some point during this playoff run, that offensive dexterity is going to matter. Or in the other case, these games just happen to be purely off the strength of defense, which would be an interesting twist. But I do think it's going to come down to offensive dexterity. So in conclusion for this part, don't let the injuries to Aaron Gordon and Peyton Watson make you forget how dangerous Denver is. I know I talked about their defense, but like I said, the biggest key is going to be that their offense remains sharp. And if Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray are just still playing their best basketball individually, like this season has been some of the best basketball we've seen them play collectively as individuals, right? They're both all-stars this year, both over 20 points per game. It's some of the best basketball they've been playing. If they can sustain that and then sustain their offense for 48 minutes, because there were some games in the OKC series last playoffs where they fumbled in the fourth quarter or in the final minutes of the fourth quarter. You have Peyton Watson this year filling the Michael Porter Jr. role. That's going to be extremely imperative if they want to sustain that offense for 48 minutes, especially if he is somebody that is indeed going to be more successful off the dribble than Michael Porter Jr. And then, of course, the acquisitions of Cam Johnson, Tim Hardaway Jr., even a guy like Spencer Jones, they have improved the floor spacing and have successfully helped Nikola Jokic breathe a little bit. But they have to make shots. And we saw that versus the most recent OKC game. If Cam Johnson makes that three late in the game in the corner, he gets a great look in the corner, they probably win that game, but he missed it. And I know not a lot of people have been high on the Cam Johnson trade after his kind of on and off season this year. I know I've been a little disappointed in it, but I still believe in him. And hopefully as a shooter, he can just show up at the right time when they need it the most. But with the Denver Nuggets, cold offense is going to ensure that they aren't playing basketball in June because their defense is just not on the same level as the San Antonio Spurs or the Oklahoma City Thunder. Again, the thing with the San Antonio Spurs is that they have the formula, but teams have been very physical with Victor Wembanyama. And I think the biggest question that Victor Wembanyama has to answer this season, or at least this offseason, is that does he want to be Kevin Durant or does he want to be Giannis Antetokounmpo? Both of these gentlemen are champions. Both of these guys are Hall of Famers. There's no right or wrong answer with Victor Wembanyama's choice, but it creates totally different play styles. Victor Wembanyama's lighter frame invites teams to push him out the paint. And his size, albeit, promotes his mobility to run the floor and do a lot of the otherworldly stuff we see on the court. And it actually preserves his shooting touch. I think he's thinking about all of those things, but it does become a detriment where now he lacks the ability to earn that post positioning that he's going to have to establish in the playoffs when the game slows down and they need a bucket. I don't think the San Antonio Spurs necessarily need his jump shots. They need him to get closer to the basket and supplement his jump shots with those easier touches. And as long as guys are pushing him out the paint, that's going to be hard to do. And I think he relies on a lot of pin down actions. And OKC, a team like the Oklahoma City Thunder, they are going to look to get their hands in those passing lanes. We just saw the New York Knicks do that versus the Spurs on Sunday. They're going to do that. And on a team with De'Aaron Fox, Devin Vassell, I don't think the Spurs need the jumpers. They need his post game, like I said. And this is why guys like Giannis, Anthony Davis, they put on that weight eventually to better absorb contact defensively and to improve their scoring on the block. Win or lose, I believe this first playoff run in the Wemby era is going to require him to answer that question. But all of this said, I'm not falling for the okie doke. I still predict that OKC will come out of the Western Conference. I'm very anxious to see how they address the issues we saw in deeper rounds of the playoffs last season. I do believe that they found a nice rhythm from downtown as of late. Before Sunday's game versus the Dallas Mavericks, they were actually shooting 40% from deep in their last 10 games. Since this game, that's dipped to 37%, but they were establishing a really nice stretch of games where they were knocking down their threes. Like I said, that team is better at shooting threes than we often think. And another thing we're going to have to look out for is the health of J-Dub, obviously. Jalen Williams has been in and out of the lineup this year, and I think he's hung in there when we have seen him this season. But if he's going to rely on drives more than jumpers because of the injury to his hand, defenses may be able to exploit that and force him to shoot and live with the results. I noticed that about today's NBA. I don't think teams exploit guys playing through injuries the way that they used to. And granted, like I said, there have been some games where Jalen Williams has shown that he can still shoot the basketball even as he's healing that hand. He's been open about the fact that it's not something that just gets healed. It's a process that's going to take a bit of time. So I think if teams know that, they should be looking to exploit that. Like, okay, well, if that's how you feel about your shooting wrist, we're going to make you shoot the ball. Like, show us that we should still respect you in that regard. So we're going to see how Oklahoma City handles that, because J-Dub wants to be healthy for the playoffs and as they try to repeat as champions. And speaking of J-Dub, his secondary initiation certainly helps, right? I've mentioned that before. He did such a good job being that secondary initiator, but when that happens, it does prevent him from scoring. And that's the tough thing about J-Dub with the Oklahoma City Thunder. They are so good when he's aggressive scoring the basketball, but at the same time, they do benefit from him being more of a point forward and helping Shai Gilgeous-Alexander breathe a little bit and relieve some of those point guard responsibilities. And this means that Chet Holmgren is going to have to step up. I said that in a previous episode. I think this year is a really big playoff for Chet Holmgren, because he needs to show that he can consistently show up on offense to combat these situations. Again, how they're going to play Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, how they're going to guard him, and whether or not J-Dub is going to be healthy enough to contribute. That means it's on him and some of those secondary guys. Again, Cason Wallace, AJ Mitchell, Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe, Jared McCain. These guys all have potential to keep OKC afloat in dry spells. But I think what happens is that their one-on-one play becomes crucial. Can defenses commit to holding them under their scoring averages? When you look at Oklahoma City, it is insane how so many guys on their roster have these games where they just play way beyond their scoring averages. And it's funny to kind of think about, defense used to be about holding somebody under their averages. But this OKC team has no problem surprising teams. And we've seen that from Cason Wallace. We've seen that from Jalen Williams, right? Jalen with the Y. So that's what I'm looking at as teams try to guard the Oklahoma City Thunder. Are you going to let the most empowered group of role players in the NBA go off, or are you going to treat them like they matter and seek to guard everybody? If Shai Gilgeous-Alexander drops 50, he drops 50. But if it means that you get less impact from the people he relies on to help him out, you might have a better chance of beating the Oklahoma City Thunder. So again, I would like to see defenses try to combat that. And then I would like to see Shai Gilgeous-Alexander get a lot more touches off the catch, especially versus a team like the Spurs, who are going to demand that he takes the ball up and takes his sweet time getting into their offense. We know the Thunder are a great team, but cleaning up a lot of these postseason flaws ensure that they repeat as champions. I'm already excited to see how the West playoffs shape up, and it certainly looks like one of these three teams will be the ones to represent the conference in this year's NBA Finals. But who that is will be based on how they execute their strengths and improve their weaknesses. Now that we've gone over what we may be able to expect from the heavy hitters out West, what does that mean for the other teams around/below them? In a tense one-on-one situation, we can't always just score. We got to give a jab to keep the defense guessing. And it's only right we continue today's show with evaluations of the next four Western Conference teams: the Minnesota Timberwolves, the Houston Rockets, the Los Angeles Lakers, and the Phoenix Suns. And I decided the best way to tackle this is to simply analyze how the matchups look if the playoffs started today. So as of this recording, the first matchup I want to get into is the second-seeded San Antonio Spurs versus the seventh-seeded Phoenix Suns. Now, presuming that this plays out as is, this would be a really fun first-round matchup. And it really just takes me back to my childhood because we haven't seen these two teams match up in the playoffs since the 2009-2010 season. It used to be a guarantee that the Phoenix Suns and the San Antonio Spurs would meet in the playoffs during the mid-2000s. We've seen it on a perennial basis. So to finally get that in this era of basketball where both teams are really good, that would be awesome. I love that for both sides. It's a vintage matchup, and I'm always here for vintage. But the Suns, they play with a chip on their shoulder, and they're one of those teams that they are a good seven seed. The Western Conference has usually been like that for a lot of my life, but the Phoenix Suns are a good 7 seed. You do not want to take them lightly. And it shows in the numbers this year. The San Antonio Spurs are 1-2 versus the Phoenix Suns this season. In game 1, there was no De'Aaron Fox, no Luke Kornet, and then the Suns didn't have Dillon Brooks or Jalen Green. The Suns won that game 130-118 at home. Then in game 2, the Spurs didn't have Wemby, they didn't have Castle, they didn't have Harper, but the Suns didn't have Grayson Allen, Ryan Dunn, or Jalen Green, and the Suns once again pulled out a victory, 111-102 at home. But game 3 was a lot different, as the Suns, the only noticeable injuries were the Phoenix Suns not having Grayson Allen, and Devin Booker only played 8 minutes that game. He went down with injury, so the San Antonio Spurs were back at home, and they just blew the Phoenix Suns out the water, 121-94. And when you look at that, it just really seems like the healthier the San Antonio Spurs are, the worse it is for Phoenix. Although the Suns have some underrated complementary pieces, and they check all the boxes. They have the scoring help from guys like Colin Gillespie. Jordan Goodwin is a really, really slept-on X factor. Jamari Bouye is a really, really slept-on X factor that they can always throw out in these games. You have rebounding from Mark Williams, who's going to hang with Wemby and look to push him out of position and get those rebounds and establish his presence and own the paint early. I think we've seen that a lot from Mark Williams throughout this season. He's had a lot of games where he gets a lot of rebounds in the first quarter because he just establishes that position. And I think that's going to be very important, especially against a guy like Wemby, who, again, like I said, has that lighter frame. Teams are going to look to be physical with him. And so it's always good to have a physical rebounder and a guy like Mark Williams in the paint to combat guys like Wemby. And then they have a glue guy in Royce O'Neal, who we've seen hit big threes on occasion. We've seen him be a really good connecting passer over the last few seasons of his NBA career. Somebody that, again, isn't going to jump out on the stat sheet, but when you watch games, he just makes the right decisions at the right times and shows up at the right times. And like I said, hits big shots at pretty big times as well. So the Suns have some pieces, and when they're healthy, they should always have a go-to scorer on the floor between Devin Booker, Dillon Brooks, and Jalen Green. Again, that is a team's dream in this era of the NBA, that you always have a scorer you can get the ball to, no matter how you want to rest your guys, no matter what your substitutions and rotations look like. You will have somebody that you can get the ball to and they can get a bucket, which is very important come playoff time. But what worries me about this is, first, how Devin Booker handles traps and double teams, because a defense like the San Antonio Spurs, who is among the top defenses in the NBA, they are going to trap him. They are going to make it hard on him, and because they would much rather the offense go through Dillon Brooks and Jalen Green than Devin Booker. And when I watched the Phoenix Suns this year, I noticed that a lot of teams like to get the rock out of his hands early. And it can sometimes be harder for Devin Booker to find his rhythm because he's giving the ball up and he's getting trapped, and teams are holding him to single-digit points by halftime. But at the same time, I have a lot of faith in Devin Booker. His game is perfect for the playoffs. We know he's a microwave scorer. He's excellent at getting 2 feet in the paint, getting those angles, finding angles to make his mid-range shots. He's a very tough guard. It's not going to be easy for those individual defenders on the San Antonio Spurs. And I do think in a grand scheme, it is going to be an uphill battle for the Phoenix Suns to try to beat the Spurs in a 7-game series. But if Devin Booker can set the tone early for his squad through his scoring, this won't be an easy series for the San Antonio Spurs. And though we've only seen very small Costco sample sizes, Jalen Green looks more like a spark plug, not necessarily a go-to guy. So that's another thing where I have yet to kind of develop an opinion on that, again, because it's been such a small sample size, but I'm very curious in seeing what that looks like, because we've seen games where Jalen Green, he had the game winner versus the Orlando Magic, I believe it was, and we've seen flashes of him being that guy. But I do think on this Phoenix Suns team, they've leaned on him more as a spark plug, more of a Jamal Crawford than he is a Devin Booker, so to speak. So that's going to be interesting. And with that in mind, I really think it's on Devin Booker and it's on Dillon Brooks to put pressure on the Spurs defense first and let Jalen Green back them up when either one of them or both of them sit. And even beyond scoring, though, the biggest thing I'm going to be watching in a potential lineup between the potential series between the San Antonio Spurs and the Phoenix Suns is that, will this series be a matter of turnovers? You look at the Phoenix Suns. They are one of 2 teams in the NBA to average 10 steals per game. Of course, the Detroit Pistons are first, but the Suns are right behind them. But then you look at the San Antonio Spurs, who have the 5th least turnovers per game. So you have a team that's really good at forcing turnovers, and you have a team that's really good at protecting the basketball. Who's going to win that battle? I think the Suns can make it tough on the Spurs if they force turnovers, and more importantly, turn those turnovers into points. Good thing is, the Suns are 3rd in points off turnovers per game, just over 20 a game. So that's a great sign if you're the Phoenix Suns. Hey, if we can force turnovers and turn those turnovers into points, we have a much better chance in this series than a lot of people will expect us to have. I think it's going to be one of those series, hypothetically, that should give us as fans a fun start to the playoffs. And I don't know why, but I keep envisioning a certain 2-7 matchup from 2009 when I think of this team. Yes, I'm talking about the Chicago Bulls versus the Boston Celtics. It likely won't be as dramatic, but I do see this as a matchup that's similar in nature, where the lower seed won't back down to the higher seed that easy. All of that to say, I got the Spurs winning that series in 6. Phoenix will give a fun fight. It will be very entertaining. They will have their moments, but I do think at the end of the day, they will be reminded that there are levels to contention, especially out west. Moving on to the next matchup, which is hypothetically between the 3-seeded Houston Rockets and the 6-seeded Los Angeles Lakers. And this first round series just feels right. I think all the implications, it just feels right. You have KD versus LeBron, Volume 4. This would be their 4th playoff series matched up against each other. You have Tari Eason likely taking on the matchup versus Luka Doncic, who matches up well with his defensive ability, but of course his size, his strength against Luka. You have Amen Thompson versus Austin Reeves. That would be a very fun matchup with the young guys right there, the rising stars, if you will. So it just feels right from a matchup standpoint, from a personnel standpoint. It makes sense. Now, defensively, I think it's pretty clear that the Rockets have the edge here. They are more they establish more individual defensive versatility than the Lakers do. Obviously, they are fifth in defensive rating compared to the Lakers, who have the 22nd best defense in the league. We know defense has been a very big critique of the Los Angeles Lakers this year, and I don't expect it to get any better. And that's going to be hard when you're facing a team like the Houston Rockets, who have scoring and guys who can attack the basket and attack downhill, and guys who can shoot. So that's going to be dangerous already. And the thing about the Houston Rockets is that they have guys where they're able to throw different looks at Luka Doncic, LeBron James, and Austin Reeves. I just outlined how I see the matchups, but again, the Houston Rockets are going to be able to switch. They're going to be able to throw different bodies. I still have yet to mention Dorian Finney-Smith. Like, they're going to take turns with a lot of these guys, and we see that in today's NBA. There's not a lot of true matchups in today's NBA. There's a lot of switching and a lot of communication because there's so much ball movement and offensive dexterity. So that's going to be interesting, but I do think the Houston Rockets have that defensive versatility to combat what the Lakers are going to bring them and present offensively. But a funny thing about this matchup is that these are the two worst bench scoring teams in the league. They are the bottom two in the league in terms of bench scoring. And again, in playoff scenarios, yes, your stars are the ones that are going to get you over the hump. Your stars can pretty much single-handedly take you to the next round of the playoffs. But you need your X factors and you need your bench guys to show up. And despite those stats, the Houston Rockets have those guys that are going to step up in Reed Shepherd and Jabari Smith Jr. Now, again, I know Jabari Smith Jr. is a starter, but you can stagger him often with the bench. Same thing with Reed Shepherd. He comes in and he can play with the starters. So they like to stagger those guys, and those are the most important secondary pieces that the Rockets have outside of a Kevin Durant, Alperen Sengun, and a Amen Thompson. But those guys will be the difference makers. You look at Jabari Smith, who's averaging 17 points, 7 rebounds on 58 45, 79 shooting splits in his last 9 games. And then you have Reed Shepherd, who is averaging 15, 3 and 3 on 47, 45, 85 splits in his last 10 games. So again, these guys are developing that rhythm around or even ahead of their season averages as they get closer to the playoffs. That's always a good sign when your guys are in rhythm leading up to the playoff months. And again, these are the primary scorers not named Durant or Sengun. So the fact that they're in rhythm is a great sign for the Houston Rockets and is going to develop that trust factor. I think developing that trust factor is exactly what Kevin Durant wanted to do from day one as a Houston Rocket. By the time we get to the playoffs, I want Jabari Smith to be confident. I want Reed Shepherd to be confident. I want Amen Thompson to be confident. And I think the Rockets, despite some of their inconsistencies, have established that goal and accomplished that goal this season. But who is that for the Lakers? Who is going to be that difference maker in this series? Who, not named Luka Doncic, LeBron James, or Austin Reeves, is going to be that difference maker? And I think it's pretty obvious. It has to be DeAndre Ayton. And I know we have no faith in that happening, but that's the matter of this series. Next man up, he has to be that guy. Because the next guys that I'm looking at are, Rui Hachimura, Luke Kennard, Marcus Smart. I'm just not confident that the Lakers have the ideal lineups to support their big three. They are going to have their flashes. Anytime you share the court with Luka Doncic or LeBron James, they are going to find a way to make you look good. But they do not have that outside offensive dexterity to keep up with a team like the Houston Rockets, where the Lakers will be lucky if they can keep these games close, because that's been the Rockets' kryptonite this year. They found themselves in a lot of close games that they probably should have put away sooner because they have dry spells and things of that nature. Again, being one of the bottom teams in terms of bench scoring, Reed Shepherd can't do it all by himself. So it's a lot of that with these two teams. And I think even on the notion of DeAndre Ayton, Alperen Sengun should be able to have his way with that dude. And you would think a series like this would be added motivation for a guy like Clint Capella to contribute, right? And that's in perfect timing. You'll hear more on that later in the show. But given that DeAndre Ayton just compared himself to Clint Capella is probably going to look into this series and be like, I'm finna show him. like even as I am getting older, I can do better than what this dude is doing. With Steven Adams hurt, Clint Capella is going to have that opportunity to show him who he is. And I don't have a lot of faith that DeAndre Ayton is going to establish that inside presence that he needs to establish to make this series more even than what it could be. And a lot of the time this season, because of DeAndre Ayton's shortcomings, we've seen the Los Angeles Lakers opt for small ball lineups, and that's not going to fly versus Houston. Let's look back at their Christmas game this season, where the Houston Rockets out-rebounded the Lakers 48-25. 25 rebounds? And especially in today's game where the possessions are at an all-time high, you can't get at least 30 rebounds because of the shot making that and the lack of defense that you have and the lack of interior dominance that you have. I just lean towards the Houston Rockets in this series. I would say Rockets in 5, maybe 6, just off the strength of the star power the Lakers have. And like I said, the Rockets do have their moments where they don't look that great either. But I think this is a good first round matchup for the Rockets to get their feet wet in the playoffs, especially to not have a fully healthy roster. And the Lakers are going to be forced to truly evaluate what they want out of a Luka Doncic and Austin Reeves era to look like. Now, Houston has the better combination of offensive production and defensive versatility, and I think the best playoff teams have that and are able to maintain that. The championship teams maintain that over the course of a postseason. And the thing about this matchup is that the next two meetings, the final meetings actually between these two teams, are going to be on March 16th and March 18th. So circle those dates and we'll have more data to work with. But as of today, I don't have a lot of faith in the Lakers. I know their stars are going to show up, but it's about those other guys. And I trust the Houston Rockets other guys more than I do the Los Angeles Lakers. And lastly, we would have the number 4 seeded Minnesota Timberwolves versus the number 5 Denver Nuggets. And the first thing I have on my notes here is that the Denver Nuggets do not want to see the Minnesota Timberwolves in the first round. And this is coming from a Denver Nugget believer the last few seasons now. They do not want to see Anthony Edwards and the Minnesota Timberwolves in the first round. Yes, even though Denver is 3-1 versus them this season, these franchises have split their last 2 playoff meetings. In 2023, obviously, the Denver Nuggets went on to win the championship, so they beat them in the series in 5 games. And then in 2024, the very next playoffs, Minnesota won in 7 games. We know that Minnesota came back from a 3-2 deficit, and they even had that Game 7 comeback. They were down like 15 at the half, so that was very memorable for that team. And that was when their rivalry started peaking a little bit. And I think this is the thing about it. We always try to say who has a rivalry now or who doesn't, but I think that's the thing with some of the rivalries we do see in today's NBA. It's not as much of it is hatred like it was in the past. It's just more so performance and excitement. And Minnesota versus Denver games tend to be very high scoring. And they get production from their stars and their complementary players. You look at the third meeting that they had this season, where Nikola Jokic dropped 56, Jamal Murray dropped 35, Anthony Edwards dropped 44, Julius Randle dropped 32, Jaden McDaniels was over 20 points that game. The Timberwolves lost that game 138-142 in overtime. Like, it's always a movie between these guys. You look at even last season in April, Nikola Jokic had his career high 61 points in a double overtime loss. It is well documented that these teams have history between each other, and they've given us as fans some really fun, intense games over the last several seasons. And it's been very clear that these players play with extra motivation when they see each other. And we just saw that on Sunday. That was a very fun game. So the Timberwolves, I think the bottom line is that they have the offensive firepower to keep up with a team like Denver. Because Denver, we know what they're going to get from Jokic and Jamal Murray and all their different weapons. But the Wolves actually match up really well with them offensively. And to even go further than that, they have the 8th best defense in the league compared to the Nuggets, who have the 21st defense, which we've went over earlier in the episode. So a healthy roster from the Denver Nuggets gives me confidence that they can win this series just off the strength of what Jokic and Jamal Murray can do. I just think it's very hard to count out the Nuggets when Jokic has all his supporting pieces, his weapons, not just offensively, but weapons as in his teammates and how he can get them the ball. Again, we have yet to see Aaron Gordon get healthy and Peyton Watson return. So I think we gotta wait till those guys get healthy to really judge them. Again, as long as Jamal Murray is pulling his weight, they're going to be dangerous. When their shooting is clicking, they're going to be dangerous. But like I said, the Timberwolves mirror them well, and they have a very strong 8-man rotation. The Nuggets, on the other hand, they have a very strong 9-man rotation with sneaky X factors to kind of mix up the series. So guys like Spencer Jones, Julian Strawther, Jalen Pickett, Zeke Naji. Remember Julian Strawther's Game 6 versus OKC last year, where he just really helped keep them alive with hot shooting. We know that shorter rotations are better for the playoffs. The longer your best players are playing, the better chances you have of winning a series. But in the era of depth, it never hurts to have a wild card in your back pocket to throw off the opposing team's game plan. And I think that's what gives the Denver Nuggets a slight edge. I mean, a slight edge over the Timberwolves, because this will be an absolute dogfight if these two teams face each other in the first round. I still don't believe the Minnesota Timberwolves will get past the conference semifinals. I'd be very surprised if they find a way to make their third consecutive Western Conference Finals, but I've been wrong before. and the thing about it is, with this series, at the 4-5 spot, the winner would go on to face Oklahoma City, and that would be back-to-back intense series. The Timberwolves, they're my kind of playoff team. Don't get me wrong. On paper, that's the team. Those are the teams I like to gravitate towards. Having a guy like Anthony Edwards, but you have somebody like Jaden McDaniels who can lock up an opposing team's best player. Somebody like Julius Randle who can get a bucket for himself, but also facilitate. Spark plugs like Bones Highland, Dante DiVincenzo, Ayo Dosunmu, Naz Reid, Big Jelly, Defensive Player of the Year candidate Rudy Gobert. Like, that's my kind of team. But I've been on record of being a Denver Nuggets believer since the beginning of the 2022-23 season, and I'm not going to stray now just because they're not healthy. But I will admit, a first-round series versus the Minnesota Timberwolves is the last matchup that they want. I'm going Nuggets in 7 if they are healthy. All eyes may be on the Oklahoma City Thunder, San Antonio Spurs, and Denver Nuggets, but these other West teams got a little something to say too. Be sure to let me know the other teams that you're willing to put your faith in to overcome or at least compete with these Western Conference giants in this year's playoffs. It's that time of the show now. Face up, jab step, fade, make or miss. First up, make or miss. Vintage NBC Telecast returns tonight for the Spurs vs. Sixers game. I love this. This is an absolute make. You mean to tell me Bob Costas, Doug Collins, and Mike Fratello, the czar, are going to return as the courtside crew for the game, with Jim Gray returning as the sideline reporter, and even bringing back NBA Showtime as the pregame show, where, yes, Hannah Storm is back, Isaiah Thomas is back, and PJ Carlissimo is back. Man, I wish they could find a way to do this once a month. Why are you announcing this in March? This should have been a once a month thing. And it doesn't stop with just bringing back a lot of the hosts and personalities. They're bringing back the vintage branding and the overlays and the logos and even the scoreboard, which, again, these logos and branding should be permanent. They just have a lot more flair and obviously bring that nostalgia from back in the day. And I just think it's going to be really cool to see that in today's NBA. Like, I love when the NBA brings back cool stuff. I love when they do that. And I said that the last episode. Why does the NBA take away good stuff? They take away all the fun stuff, but they're bringing it back. At least for the one time, they're bringing it back. But if this really is a home run, they have to find a way to make this a little bit more consistent. I know guys are getting older, things of that nature. But man, like, it's a blessing that a lot of these personalities are still here and they're still able to do this. It's great for the game. You never want to forget where you came from. You never want to forget who laid that foundation before you. Like, these were the personalities we saw on our TVs a lot coming up. Obviously, I got different eras of Bob Costas, Doug Collins more so when he was on ESPN and TNT. Mike Fratello was always alongside Marv Albert, so I love that he's coming back. Jim Gray was always had the exclusive interviews and whatnot back in the day across boxing and basketball and all the sports. So I mean, Hannah Storm, man, she was the face of that pregame show, man. So yeah, it's really nice to see all these personalities back. This is an absolute make. You know, many of them have still been in TV or podcasting the last few years now. So I know they're going to be just as sharp and doing their thing. So like I said, it's great for the game, and I wish they could do it a lot more often. We mentioned it previously. Make or miss. DeAndre Ayton accuses the Lakers of turning him into Clint Capella. This is an absolute miss. A brick, DeAndre Ayton. Come on, man. What are you doing? What are you talking about? Now, in theory, we understand what he meant, right? Somebody who benefits from alley-oops and dump-offs. They trying to turn me into Clint Capella because he knows that deep down he is a first overall pick and has the low post game to be at least on the surface better than Clint Capella. But in his heyday, Clint Capella was doing a lot of the things that DeAndre Ayton hasn't been doing. He was a rebounding machine. I'm talking 14, 15 rebounds a game. He was always, for the most part, included in the lower end of the Defensive Player of the Year conversations. He was never really a finalist, but his name was in there. So quite frankly, DeAndre Ayton should be trying to be just like Clint Capella. That's the irony of what he said. I was rooting for DeAndre Ayton to prove himself. He wanted to come to the Lakers. They didn't even need him to do much. He wanted to be here. He wanted to take his place among the legendary Lakers big men in their history. Most big men look forward to this opportunity. They love this opportunity. But the thing is, when it mattered the most, DeAndre Ayton continues to just get played off the floor in important moments, and his production has increased. His effort is lackadaisical. Most noticeably in his points, his shot attempts, his rebounds, all of that has decreased. He just has to bring forth that consistency. He can't be putting up 20 and 10 or even 15 and 10 on a bi-weekly basis. You can't just clock in and clock out. If he wants the respect of fans and even his teammates, if he wants the ball to do what he says he can do, to do what he believes is better than Clint Capella, he has to earn that. He has to earn that respect of his teammates to do that. Your teammates are going to ride for you regardless, but you have to give them evidence at the end of the day. That's what sports is for the most part. You have to give them evidence. And DeAndre Ayton hasn't been giving them enough of that. So he should actually be studying Clint Capella, especially on a team like this. It would probably do you better to embrace what Clint Capella did. Maybe get his phone number and ask him how he did it with James Harden and Chris Paul and all these guys that he's been able to play with. Given the situation he's in now, I think he should be like Clint Capella. That's the irony of this statement. So yeah, that was a miss, DeAndre Ayton. Come on, man. You got to be better than that. You got to be better than that. Make or miss, Dejounte Murray returns from his ACL injury. Man, Dejounte Murray returned from his injury the other day. I can't think of who they were facing. I'm losing it right now, but I loved what I saw from him. I thought he looked like himself. He didn't really miss a beat. I think it's another example of how impressive it is that guys are coming back from injuries and being able to perform and play well and still have a quick first step and look sharp offensively. Like, I really thought that was cool to see. I haven't been able to check out how he's looked defensively in terms of on-ball defense, but I'm really rooting for Dejounte Murray to return to that all-around two-way guard that he developed into. I loved his ascension in San Antonio. I've said it before. I'll say it again. I absolutely hated that the Atlanta Hawks picked him up the minute he turned into a lead all-star caliber guard. I thought it just threw off the only thing it really did for him was improve his half-court scoring ability and become a trustworthy scorer. But man, outside of that, it just wasn't a good fit alongside Trae Young. But I think getting back to a team like the New Orleans Pelicans, that allows him to actually do more of what he did with the Spurs. He can set up Zion. He can set up Trey Murphy. He can set up Sadiq Bey. He can help out Derek Queen. Like, it's a lot of options. He can mentor Jeremiah Fears. I really think it's cool. Obviously, Jordan Poole is still in the mix, so that's a good score to put alongside a guy like that who at his absolute peak can be a triple-double threat kind of player. So Dejounte Murray's always been one of my favorite players. I'm happy that he's back. He's healthy. His mind looks to be in a better place. And I love that he said, like, yo, I don't care that we're 14th in the West and all this tanking mess is going on. Like, I'm a basketball player. I want to play basketball, and I don't care if we were 1-81. Like, I'm going to come out here, even if it is in the month of March, and I'm going to play basketball because that's what I worked hard to do. This is what I love doing, and I take pride in my work. I take pride in my craft, and I want to improve, and I want to get back to where I was. So shout out to Dejounte Murray, man. That's an absolute make. Blessings to you. Hopefully it's more health from here on out, whether you're a Pelican or, I know there's trade rumors and things of that nature. Anything can happen, but for the future, I'm really rooting for him to find his way back because I've always loved his game. And then not the last one. Two more. Make or miss. Paolo Banchero is averaging 25, 9, and 7 post All-Star break. That is a make. And I got to be the one to admit, I didn't vocalize it, but I was starting to see him as a guy that was closer to a Julius Randle type of talent than the kind of MVP caliber guy he was drafted to become. And it reminded me why, yes, you're only good as your last game, quote unquote. But myself included, we forget how young these guys are and how most of these guys have a whole career to develop different aspects of their game and develop consistency with those aspects. And I think that's what Paolo Banchero ran into. We just can't be so quick to turn on players when they don't fit our visions of success. So the fact that he's been able to figure it out and get back to being that aggressive Paolo Banchero, not settling for the jump shots, getting to the free throw line, improving those rebounds, getting his teammates involved, being that point forward. I love seeing that. It gave me faith again that dude wants to be the top guy. And even that is an interesting point, right? Because it makes you wonder, is Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner better off apart than they are together? Like, it reminds me of a taller version of Paul George and Kawhi Leonard. They were good together, don't get me wrong. But low-key, if you were really watching their games, they were a lot more comfortable when they weren't playing without the other. And I think we've seen that. We've seen Franz have a lot of really good games when Paolo's not out there. And we've seen Paolo have a lot of really good games when Franz is not out there. It makes me wonder, if you're the Orlando Magic, how are you assessing that? Or is there a lane where they can both succeed and take pride in being the top two guys on the roster? Like, I just don't know if they can be this productive together than they are, as much as they are separate. So that's something that I'm watching out for. But for the time being, shout out Paolo Banchero. It's good to see him playing good basketball as the Orlando Magic are seeking to solidify a playoff spot. Last make or miss, Jonathan Kuminga averaging 21, 8, 3, and almost 2 steals a game in 3 games with the Atlanta Hawks. You know that's a make. I thought it was a make when they traded for him, and it's a make within these last few games. I know it's very early, but what we've seen from Jonathan Kuminga aligns with my previous assessments of him. He's playing free, and he's happy now. I haven't seen that brother smile so much in my life. He's with an organization that wants him. He isn't confined to a system. I really think that Jonathan Kuminga was a better version of what the Warriors experienced with Eric Pascal, right? Eric Pascal is on record saying, I admittedly was a scorer, and I did not want to sit there and pass the ball to Stephen Curry every trip down. I wanted to do my thing. And that's why he fizzled out with the Warriors. And I think the same thing happened to Jonathan Kuminga. This is a guy who knew himself. You got to give Jonathan Kuminga some credit, man. He's a young guy, but he knew he had that knowledge of self to say, I think I can be a little bit better, and I don't really like how I'm being used. And he did his thing. Jonathan Kuminga, for the most part, he showed up, and when they did play him, he proved that he could be an impactful player in this league. But it was just the fact that he was confined to that system. But now he's on a Hawks team with impressive depth. They have an impressive mix of creators and shooting. It is literally like a kid in a playground. You can take your kid to the playground and watch them roam, free, frolic, do what they do, slide down a slide. They're just in heaven. That's what Jonathan Kuminga is with the Atlanta Hawks. There is no pressure with this team. Like, all he has to do is run the floor and drive. He is another athletic wing who, like Jalen Johnson, we're seeing it with Jalen Johnson. He ascended because of this. The reason why they were able to move on from Trae Young was because they realized, oh, look at this. We have a 6'9", point forward that can just run the floor, and we have all these shooters and creators around him where when he can't get a shot for himself, we have all these other options to give it to. So then when you force defenses to shift and scramble and close out and find a matchup, you have another athletic guy like Jonathan Kuminga who can just fill those lanes and get dunks and layups. Like it's a playground for him. I'm not at all surprised with his early success. And at some point, I won't be naive. At some point, I've been on record of saying this. He has to develop his half-court game even more, so then it makes a lot more sense with Jalen Johnson when that game slows down and they're not able to fly up and down the court. And not everything is going to be in transition. But from what we're seeing early in these 3 games, the flashes are there. These are some good early flashes from Jonathan Kuminga. So I love this for him, and it's an absolute make. So not much today. I think a nice 5 shots is cool. We went 4 or 5 from the field, and that's what we strive for, almost 100%, but we will take 80% from the field. The playoffs, though, they're going to bring a lot more tougher trends and predictions. So while we enjoy these makes, we can't get too high. Let's keep it going and hope that next week is just as kind as this week. As always, before we end today's show, we got to show love to our mid-post player of the week. And today's player is a hidden gem. We've given the honor to a lot of old school guys and whatnot, but this is going to go to a hidden gem. And if you follow my Substack, you were able to read my realistic NBA player comparisons. And this guy was one of those players that I mentioned. He was a streaky scorer, a tough perimeter defender, and had all the post game that many of the players that studied MJ or Kobe had. And oh yeah, you probably know him for being the subject of Kendrick Lamar's first verse on Black Boy Fly. This week's mid-post player of the week goes to Arron Afflalo. Arron Afflalo was drafted to the Detroit Pistons in 2007, which was, of course, towards the end of their Eastern Conference reign. It took a couple years for him to find his footing. Detroit didn't work out as they were transitioning to a rebuild. So he was traded to the Denver Nuggets in the 2009 offseason, and this is where he found his home, at least temporarily. In his 3rd season, he started for the Nuggets, actually, who were still contending at this time. They still had Carmelo Anthony, still trying to get over the hump. And he quickly emerged as an elite 3-point shooter, for over 40% averages in these years. Most would call him a 3-and-D guy today, but this was a guy that could score in the mid-range. He could put the ball on the floor. He could score out of the post. And his value gradually increased as his role got bigger. And after the years went by, he was actually included in the trade that sent Andre Iguodala to Denver and Andrew Bynum to Philly. It was a multi-team trade. So Arron really got a bigger opportunity once he got traded to Orlando. And this is where he hit his highest scoring marks. He averaged 16.5 in his first year with the team and then 18.2 in his second year with the Magic. And again, we saw a lot of that, him a lot closer being a more first option, second option kind of guy, the guy that they want to feed in the half court. He was able to do a lot of what he did in Denver and then some. And then he was only there for those 2 years as he eventually found his way back to Denver before stints in Portland, New York, Sacramento, and then again in Orlando for his last season. And I just think Arron Afflalo was one of those guys that was just he was easily expendable because of his skill set. Like, teams are always looking for guys that can score in multiple facets, guys that can shoot with the best of them. He can rebound a bit, pass a little bit. He was always around 15, 3-and-3 averages. He was always a guy that could rebound his position, make plays. Like, he was just a dependable basketball player. That's what always comes to mind when I think about him. And like I said, he could defend too. So he fit the description perfectly. Teams are always looking for guys that have that skill set. And he kind of fizzled out and was out the league by his early 30s, unfortunately. But 11 years in the league is still a great feat. And I think, again, the film just speaks for itself. He had the clutch gene. He was competitive. He had the fadeaway over both shoulders. He had the shimmy fades. He had the 3-point shot. I think he would have made even more money in today's game, and he probably would have lasted even longer. It's just a great example for aspiring hoopers. Find a niche, right? Find your niche, which for him was defense, while you develop what you want to be good at, which is scoring, and then you work at it until opportunity knocks. And then when it comes, you keep working. That's what he did in Denver. That's what he did in Orlando. That one season he was with New York playing with Melo. Like, they worked pretty well together despite being a mediocre team. So again, Aaron Aflalo, he was not a flashy dude. I know his name don't jump off the page, but he was dependable and just had the perfect criteria to get the mid-post player of the week this week. So shout out Aaron Aflalo, but that's all I got for today's show. We're 5 episodes in now, so if you like this episode and enjoyed the show, please don't be shy and let me know. Honest reviews and ratings are appreciated always, and make sure you follow the socials to stay connected with the mid-post. In the meantime, I'll catch you in the post next week. Peace out, and God bless.